The Premier League is an English league now almost solely in the sense that games are still played in England. For now at least. Only 32% of the league's players, 20% of managers, and crucially, just 22% of owners are English. Including minority shareholders, there are 12 nationalities represented among the Premier League's 37 major owners, whether they be individuals, companies, or nation-states. Despite the Premier League's cosmopolitanism though, there is one nation, increasingly, which is beginning to dominate the makeup of the division's ownership. Americans account for less than 1% of Premier League players overall, there are just 5 of them, and 0% of managers, Bob Bradley, David Wagner, and Jesse Marsh being the only 3 failed Yank experiments in the league's more than 30-year past, yet they make up over 43% of the division's 37 part or whole owners. Together, they have stakes in half of the Premier League's 20 clubs, controlling or majority interests in 9 of them, and 6 are entirely American-owned. That includes 4 of the Premier League's rich 6, namely Arsenal, Chelsea, and England's 2 best supported, and most successful clubs Liverpool and Manchester United. Meanwhile, even City Football Group, the multi-club ownership conglomerate that owns Manchester City, is 18% American-owned. And Joe Lewis, the majority shareholder of the only rich 6 club with no American ownership, Spurs, spends most of his time on a mega yacht in Barbados, in North America. It means that over half of the Premier League's revenue, for the first time this season, is distributed to American-owned clubs. And if Everton's proposed takeover by Miami-based 777 Partners receives Premier League approval, half of the teams in the top flight of English football will be majority American-owned. It's not just the Premier League though. Almost a third, 22 in total, of the EFL's 72 Championship, League One and League Two clubs are now also American-owned, as are a couple of clubs in the National League, which is the highest level of non-league football in England. Of those 22 American EFL takeovers, a whopping 14 of them have occurred since Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenny acquired their non-league Wrexham in February 2021. Yes, during COVID, while some people baked banana bread, learnt a new language, or acquired a pet, American billionaires and multimillionaires were busy buying up English football clubs at an unprecedented rate. It has been a sort of silent revolution though. While the arrival of Middle Eastern nation-states and a swamp of Chinese businesses and billionaires a few years ago was treated with great suspicion, the more significant influx of American capital has been greeted with relative ambivalence, likely due to a perception of shared cultural norms. After all, these are people with whom we share a common language and history of war crimes. They're basically us, just less miserable, keener on shooting each other, and incapable of using their inside voice in restaurants. Right? Well, we shall see. Because in today's video, we're going to be discussing all things Americana in the English game. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Wrexham via Hollywood, Manchester via Florida, and of course, Woking via South Carolina, as we take a look at the American invasion of English football, why America's super rich have begun buying Premier League, EFL, and even non-league teams in English football en masse, and what all of it might mean for the future of the world's oldest football league system. The most obvious answer to the question of why Americans keep buying English football clubs, you might have thought, is to make money. After all, just look at who the investors are. Almost all of them are billionaire investors with a background in private equity and asset management. Wes Edens, just to give one example, who co-owns V Sports along with Nassef Sawiris, which in turn owns Aston Villa, didn't amass a net worth of almost $5 billion by investing in things which he didn't believe could generate him a return. No, Edens began his career in the late 80s at Lehman Brothers. He subsequently joined BlackRock's private equity division, BlackRock Asset Investors, and eventually he co-founded his own private equity firm called Fortress Investment Group, which today has almost $50 billion in assets under management. Unlike in the case of, say, the Saudi or Emirati states, or jet-setting oligarchs, for whom there are often a whole raft of other considerations, Whatever they might say publicly, the raison d'etre for almost all American investors in English football is to make a return on their investment. It used to be said, however, that the fastest way in which to become a millionaire was to start out as a billionaire and buy a football club. But that isn't really true, certainly not anymore. It is true that outside of the Premier League, and particularly in the Championship, English football clubs hemorrhage cash, and in some cases are extremely indebted. But in the Premier League, revenues have risen to such an extent that it is more than possible to become not just sustainable, but profitable in some circumstances. The most obvious example of the potential profitability of owning an English football club is of course the Glazers at Manchester United. Between 2003 and 2005, Malcolm Glazer paid £790 million to acquire Manchester United, leveraging the club's own debt in order to finance the deal. Glazer only actually spent £270 million of his own money to buy the club. The rest was all debt saddled upon them, which has since cost Manchester United themselves more than £700 million in interest alone. Since 2016, the Glazer family have paid themselves £155 million in dividend payments alone, over half of what Malcolm Glazer personally paid for the club between 2003 and 2005, which has caused great controversy among Manchester United fans. Whilst paying a dividend is unusual for English football clubs, and is understandably deemed to be unpalatable by supporters, in light of Manchester United's recent fall from grace and neglected spending in other areas such as on infrastructure, it is relatively insignificant, at least in the grand scheme of things. There are two main ways in which an investment can deliver a return. There are dividend payments, which are, as I say, relatively rare in English football, and then there are capital gains, which is just another way of saying that the value of an investment has increased, allowing an investor to sell an asset for a larger price. There is also foreign currency effects, but that's less relevant here, and we really don't need to get into it. Capital gains and lucrative exits are where the real money is in the Premier League. In the 18 years since Malcolm Glazer bought Manchester United for £790 million, using just £270 million of his own money, the club's value has skyrocketed to well in excess of £4 billion. In exchange for a quarter of the club's shares, Britain's second wealthiest person, Jim Ratcliffe, recently paid the Glazers $1.3 billion, or more than £1 billion, while promising to invest a further $300 million in the club. The £6 billion that the Glazer family reportedly values Manchester United at in the event of a full sale represents an almost 700% increase on their late father's initial investment. The S&P 500, by contrast, which is the world's most popular stock market index, tracking the performance of the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the United States, has returned less than 300% during that time. The lesson of the Glazers, therefore, is that if you want to be a billionaire, first become a millionaire by founding a broadcasting conglomerate and diversified holding company, then launch a massively unpopular leverage buyout of one of the world's most popular football clubs, sit back, and wait for the capital to appreciate. Admittedly, it's not quite as pithy or memorable, and nor is it guaranteed to be a success. The key to the Glazers' success at Manchester United was the fact that the Red Devils had capitalised upon the early success of the Premier League and had marketed themselves better than anyone else, whilst also being more successful than anyone else during the 1990s, and the Glazers accelerated that marketisation and financialisation throughout the 2000s. As football grew, therefore, and particularly the Premier League, and Manchester United remained market leaders, their revenues continued, and, indeed, still continue to rise. For fellow Americans Randy Lerner at Aston Villa or Ellis Short at Sunderland, it was a very different story. Lerner lost an estimated £70,000 a day during his decade owning Villa, despite paying £62.6 million for the club in 2006 and selling it for a reported £60 million in 2016, having lost money throughout almost the entirety of that time and having been relegated with crippling debts in Lerner's final season at Villa Park. Short, meanwhile, lost more than £200 million at Sunderland, accounting for roughly a quarter of his entire net worth, and he was forced to wipe his £125 million debt that the club owed him in order to facilitate a sale to a consortium headed by Stuart Donald in 2018. Nor are the Glazers alone, though. It took Stan Kroenke more than 10 years to acquire all of Arsenal's shares, and ended up costing him just a shade north of £1 billion. Arsenal are now valued at $2.26 billion by Forbes, but given the more than $3 billion that Todd Boehly and Clearlake Capital paid for Chelsea, and Arsenal's recent resurgence as a major force in English football, it seems unlikely that Kroenke would entertain anything less than that, and if they were to win the Premier League title this season, you could probably shift it closer to $4 billion. But even the most conservative estimates would see Kroenke already double his money. John W. Henry paid a total of £300 million for Liverpool in 2010, who have since won both the Premier League and the Champions League. Forbes now values Liverpool at north of $5 billion, or £4 billion, though it has been reported that Henry himself is looking for somewhere in the region of $7 billion. That's an increase of between 13 and 18 times Henry's initial investment. You won't find many blue chip stocks with a multiple that can rival that rate of return over the same period of time. It's not just the established super clubs either. Aston Villa, though a terrible investment for Randy Lerner, will likely be valued at in excess of $1 billion in 12 months' time, after Wes Edens and Nassef Sawiris paid £30 million for the club and spent almost £500 million on the first team squad. John Textor, David Blitzer and Josh Harris would all likely double their money in the event of a sale at Crystal Palace, assuming that the club retains their Premier League status, and in the less likely scenario that Burnley managed to stay up, Alan Pace's £170 million investment back in 2020 would likely already have enjoyed significant appreciation. You might be sitting there thinking, a bit like Charlie Nicholas,
and I'm sitting there thinking, if that was Gareth Barry, or even James Milner.
That's all well and good, Alfie. Premier League revenues have exploded throughout the last 30 years, but the most recent domestic Premier League television deal, though marginally larger than the previous one overall due to an increased number of games being broadcast, was less lucrative than the previous one on a per-game basis. Tickets are surely now at the upper limit of what most would deem to be reasonable, especially during a cost of living crisis. And if Sheffield United, Nottingham Forest, and even Chelsea for a long time are anything to go by, in terms of their lengthy search to source new front of shirt sponsors who met their valuations, commercial revenue isn't necessarily set to skyrocket in the immediate future. So where, pray tell, do all of these golf-playing, polo shirt-wearing, Epstein Island visiting American billionaires expect their growth and massive returns to come from? I should clarify, not all American billionaires visited Epstein's Island. Or maybe they did. I don't really hang around in those kind of circles, but I just thought I'd best issue that clarification regardless, since they are famously litigious. Well, for a start, a lot of American investors are of the opinion that Europeans, broadly speaking, aren't very good at marketing and financialization. In other words, we're bad at capitalism, and they think that they can do it better. That was the view of Malcolm Glazer 20 years ago, even when acquiring the best club in England at marketing and global outreach, and it is still the view of most of the Americans currently buying up English clubs. Within the world of football, the Premier League is widely viewed as being the creme de la creme of marketing and negotiating media rights. The Premier League rakes in over $4 billion a season through its domestic and international broadcast rights, which are renegotiated every few years. That's more than double any other league in world football, making it the envy of clubs in Spain, Italy and France who have tried and failed to keep up, but have only fallen further and further behind in recent years. Americans, however, are a little bit less impressed. As far as they're concerned, those are rookie numbers, and they have good reason to think that. Globally, the NFL has nowhere near the appeal of the Premier League, yet the NFL generated almost $12 billion in revenue in 2022 and aims to increase that to an insane $25 billion annually by 2027, in just 3 years' time. The Premier League, by contrast, generated just, and I do use that word with a bit of an asterisk, £5.5 billion in the 2021-22 season. It means the NFL is over twice as lucrative as the Premier League and is growing its revenue faster than English football's top flight. In some ways, you might think that makes sense. The NFL is the most popular sports league in the United States, which is the richest country in the world and has 6 times England's population. But as we've already established, English football is really English in name only. While the NFL has some global appeal, they are able to sell out games at Wembley Stadium and the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, for instance. Every major sports league in the United States can only dream of having the global appeal of European football. You will find people wearing Manchester United and Liverpool shirts and knowing all about their players and results in almost every corner of the globe, to an extent that simply isn't the case with the Kansas City Chiefs or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Americans look at the Premier League, therefore, and don't see saturation like a lot of European investors, but enormous growth potential. Not only that, as far as they're concerned, English football clubs are very cheap. The 10 most valuable sports teams on the planet, as valued by Forbes, are all based in the United States. The 11th most valuable, Real Madrid, are member-owned and therefore not for sale, even if someone was willing to stump up the $6.07 billion that Forbes estimates they're worth. In the Premier League, the rich 6 all have valuations of between $2.2 to $6 billion, but even that makes Arsenal, Chelsea and Tottenham, for example, less valuable than every single NFL team and all but a couple of the lowest valued NBA teams, such as, and yes, I double checked and this is their real name, the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies, by the way, who are ranked as the least valuable of the NBA's 30 franchises, are still valued at $2.4 billion, which is more than Arsenal, the 3rd most successful club in the history of English football. It's after the rich 6, though, who are at least valued in the billions, that Americans see sports teams that are comically cheap when compared to what they're used to at home. Saudi Arabia paid just £300 million to acquire Newcastle United in 2021, an established Premier League team with 130 years of history and one of the largest stadiums and fan bases in the English game. You could buy 10 Newcastle Uniteds for the price of the least valuable of the NFL's 32 franchises, namely the Arizona Cardinals, who are valued at $3.5 billion. There are baseball teams valued at almost 20 times as much as Newcastle. Even Major League Soccer, which is considered a third-rate league by most Europeans and has a relatively tiny audience outside of the United States, has valuations far higher than most Premier League teams. West Ham, owing to their location and stadium, are the only team outside of the rich 6 who are valued at more than the likes of LAFC, LA Galaxy, and Atlanta United. And even then, only just. Toronto FC, who finished bottom of the overall Major League Soccer standings in 2023, and have only ever won 1 MLS Cup and 1 Supporters' Shield, both in 2017, are still valued at almost twice as much as Newcastle was sold for in 2021. The most recent MLS franchise, namely San Diego FC, who are scheduled to join the league in 2025, paid $500 million for that privilege. That's over twice as much as the UAE paid to buy Manchester City in 2010, and about £100 million more than John W. Henry paid to buy Liverpool. Heck, even National Women's Soccer League teams in the United States are now valued at between $50 to $150 million, making the most attractive of them more valuable than some Premier League teams. So Premier League teams are cheap as far as American investors are concerned, and EFL teams are even cheaper. Championship side Birmingham City, who were recently acquired by US firm Knighthead Capital Management, did so with a valuation of just £22 million. Fellow American Kevin Nagel, through his holding company Town FC LLC, paid nothing to buy fellow Championship and recent Premier League side Huddersfield Town, with his promise to write off a £40 million debt, functioning effectively as the purchase price, and Premier League promotion contenders Ipswich Town were acquired by American pension fund managers for the same price in 2021. Given that Premier League promotion alone is now worth £135 million, rising to over £260 million if a club survives the first season, that is a calculated risk that has proved to be very attractive. even if promotion isn't necessarily as easy as some new or prospective owners imagine. Of course, promotion and relegation itself is an alien concept to most Americans. Speaking to Marketplace a few months ago, American investor Jordan Gardner, who bought and sold Danish club FC Helsinger in recent years and is a minority investor at Swansea City, stated, quote, "In the promotion system, you can buy the equivalent of a AAA baseball team and get it to the equivalent of the major leagues. And what comes with that is huge jumps in revenue, the value of your club, so it can, if done properly, be financially lucrative." End quote. It's probably quite odd to a European audience, for whom promotion and relegation is so normal, to hear it spoken about in such mysterious terms. But the reality is that in major US sports, it just doesn't exist. American investors, therefore, who are motivated primarily by financial returns, talk in very frank terms about their aims, ambitions, and, in private at least, their exit strategies when acquiring English football clubs. Promotion from League One to the Championship, for example, is described as a five-bagger due to the potential to 5 times your initial investment in the event of a sale, and promotion to the Premier League a six-bagger for the same reason. Promotion from League One to the Premier League, therefore, something which American-owned Ipswich Town are attempting to pull off this season, is viewed by Americans as potentially delivering a 3,000% return on a company or individual's initial investment. Those sums are at the upper limit of what we have previously seen. In terms of valuations, it would mean that Ipswich in the Premier League would have to be valued at around £1.2 billion, which seems improbable anytime soon, but you start to get an idea of why the prospect of owning a lower league football club, which is viewed with such suspicion and considered to be fraught with danger and challenges by Britain's super rich, is perceived as being a fun, challenging, and, potentially, extremely lucrative endeavour by wealthy Americans. Of course, none of these considerations exist within a vacuum, and there is no better example of that than probably the most significant American ownership in English football, in terms of inspiring a whole raft of other American takeovers, and that is Hollywood duo Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenny at Wrexham. In the interest of accuracy, it's just worth pointing out that Reynolds was born in Canada, though he has been a US citizen since 2018, so he's now officially a Canadian American. Also, in the interest of accuracy, Wrexham is a city of about 45,000 people in North Wales, not in England, but due to historic reasons, Wrexham compete in the English rather than the Welsh Football League system. Reynolds and McElhenny bought Wrexham for just £2 million in February 2021, a valuation which reflected the fact that Wrexham were in the National League, which is the 5th tier of English football, outside of even the EFL, and they had been outside of the Football League for a whopping 13 years. Promotion to League Two last season has already trebled Wrexham's valuation, up to £8 million, and the club currently sit within the League Two promotion places, which would likely see another trebling effect. Following an estimated £10 million cash injection, it should be said, on the part of the acting and entrepreneurial duo. More significant still, however, is the way in which they have marketed and used their contacts to increase Wrexham's reach and marketability beyond anything ever previously seen in the English non-league game. A docuseries called Welcome to Wrexham, produced by FX and Boardwalk Pictures and distributed on Hulu and Disney+, has been a massive success. Series 1 and 2 gave Wrexham a level of profile, attention and fan engagement unlike any club in English football outside of the Premier League, particularly in the United States, and has led to lucrative sponsorship opportunities with TikTok, United Airlines, and HP, the laptop company, not the source, 3 companies all valued at in excess of $20 billion. American investors already thought that they could market European football better than Europeans, but Wrexham's rise has served to cement that theory. Doing a Wrexham is now the aim of the game for a handful of Americans who have set their sights, or indeed have already acquired English lower league clubs. It is all well and good, and most Wrexham fans are delighted with their American owners, but of course, by nature, not everyone can do a Wrexham. Bournemouth, also now American-owned, is another case study that is frequently cited by American investors. In 6 seasons, Bournemouth went from League 2, English football's 4th tier, to the Premier League, which is the most lucrative football league on the planet. Again though, just as it is a fairly unique set of circumstances and contacts which have allowed Reynolds and McElhenny to transform Wrexham into a worldwide brand and a television show with a football team attached, Bournemouth's rise through the divisions over a very short period of time is a distinctly atypical occurrence. It's one which, over the last 20 or so years, has only been replicated by a few clubs, and for good reason. The EFL has fairly strict profit and sustainability rules, which dictate how much teams are allowed to lose and therefore spend, meaning more established teams with higher revenues have an inbuilt advantage, and recently relegated Premier League teams with parachute payments have a massive financial advantage, hence why so many of them get promoted. Here too, though, there is hope and ambitions on the part of American investors. English football is already the most marketised and financialised in all of Europe, and though it may be the oldest football league system in the world, it is not adverse to reform. After all, the Premier League itself is only a 30-year-old creation and has completely transformed English football's top flight over a remarkably short period of time. The EFL playoffs, likewise, are a very recent and popular addition to the English game and have proven to be wildly successful. Anyone who thinks that English football club owners are done there, though, is sorely mistaken. Project Big Picture, which was a power grab by what are already English football's most powerful clubs, was spearheaded by American-owned Manchester United and Liverpool. The European Super League, in its first incarnation, was signed up to by all 6 English invitees, 5 of whom are partially and 4 of whom are majority American-owned, and they only pulled out due to sustained and overwhelming pressure from their own supporters. We're not done there though. Further restructuring will come, new, more profitable formats will be discovered, and redistribution is likely to be revamped. Parachute payments, for example, have come under increased scrutiny in recent years, and EFL chairman Rick Parry wants to see them abolished entirely and replaced by fairer redistribution across the Championship and EFL. That's an attractive thought for investors in EFL clubs, though it's worth noting that, on this front, American owners are unlikely to present a united front. These are largely an array of self-interested asset managers, their interest, namely, being protecting and increasing the value of their asset. Scrapping Premier League parachute payments, therefore, may sound very appealing to Plymouth's American owners, but less so to Bournemouth or Leeds's. There are also a lot of external factors, outside of football, which are causing American investors to take an increased interest in English football clubs. Just for a start, at the highest level, there are only a very small number of people and companies who are both willing and able to acquire top Premier League teams. Manchester United might be cheap compared to the Dallas Cowboys, but the Glazers' valuation of the club is higher than the net worth of all but about 7 people or families in the United Kingdom. Basically, you need to be very rich to own a football club that wants to win anything, and the US has a lot more very rich people than the UK. This might seem like quite a rudimentary point, but it's nonetheless significant. There are 735 American billionaires versus just 52 in the UK, so 14 times as many, and there is not a single Brit among the 50 richest people in the world, compared to 26 Americans, or over half. There are only 5 people in the entire United Kingdom who are wealthier than Fulham's Pakistani American owner Shahid Khan, let alone who are able to compete with the wealth of nation-states like Saudi Arabia or the UAE, and Newcastle United and Manchester City. More significant still than individual wealth has been the rise of asset management companies, who increasingly control at least Western or, to be more pointed, non-Chinese trade and commerce, and have become freakishly rich and powerful. It used to be the case that, whilst powerful, asset management companies seemed sort of nebulous and detached from most people's lives. They weren't, but it seemed like that. They invested in stocks which existed in the form of lines on graphs that went up and down, but the sun still rose in the morning and set on an evening, and ordinary people went about their lives unmoved. Now these companies have become so large, though, and so hegemonic, that they are increasingly coming into contact with things that we actually recognise as being real. Asset management companies, for example, traditionally avoided investing in residential real estate, considering it to be a bit messy, potentially unpopular, and outside of their purview. Now they are buying up houses and apartments, or indeed building them en masse, viewing residential property as a stable and lucrative investment for the long term, and one which they can control more and more as they come to dominate the market. It's a similar story with football clubs. Once considered a risky investment, possibly worth pursuing as a passion project for the founder or CEO of an asset management company, but not as a serious investment for the company themselves, now football clubs are viewed in a totally different light. It's not just the myriad growth opportunities already mentioned, it's the fact that in a rapidly changing world, with external shocks like AI and climate change predicted to wipe out or at least majorly disrupt entire industries, sport is seen as being relatively insulated from those threats, durable in the face of market shocks, and an excellent form of diversification. Athletes are unlikely to be replaced by robots anytime soon, sports fans are reliable and willing to part with their hard-earned cash to fund their fandom, and crucially, in terms not just of protecting your investment, but increasing the value of it, football is immensely popular in parts of the world that are still experiencing significant economic growth. Africa, Asia, and Latin America, home of the world's fastest growing economies, in countries like India, Ethiopia, and the Philippines, football enjoys huge support. As far as investors are concerned, these are all markets with millions, if not billions of fans, who might currently be economically inactive in terms of driving clubs and the league's revenue, but are likely to become increasingly active, supposing we avoid apocalyptic collapse, over the coming decades. Because of football's global appeal, therefore, particularly in the developing world, the upside is far greater from that perspective than any of America's already extremely expensive sports teams. Even in the United States, which is one of the world's most developed countries, football, or soccer, is enjoying a surge in popularity, which investors expect to accelerate by virtue of co-hosting the 2026 World Cup, making it another location considered to be ripe for growth. The 7 largest asset management companies in the world, BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, State Street, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, are all based in the United States, and America is very much the global capital of asset management firms. By nature, therefore, as asset management companies begin flooding into football, and particularly, though far from exclusively, English football, more clubs are going to become American-owned by default. Factor in the tax advantages and write-offs afforded to the owners of sports teams in the United States, the strength of the dollar and the weakness of the pound in recent years, and the appeal of the multi-club ownership model, and you end up with a situation that we have seen since the beginning of the pandemic. The pound, for example, bought over $2 in 2007. If you were a Brit who travelled to America at the time, lots of things seemed very cheap compared to at home. Not healthcare, obviously, but like burgers and clothes and things. By September 2022, however, at just about the peak of American investment in English football, the dollar and the pound had almost reached parity. On September 26th, the pound fell to just $1.035. Just as that makes things in America more expensive for Brits who travel there, and things cheaper in Britain for Americans who visit here, it also puts English football clubs on a sort of sale for American investors, whose assets tend to be held primarily in dollars. One of the problems with asset management companies is that they tend not to be very popular. They are a sort of cold grey thing, and their intentions, namely to increase the value of their assets and to earn a worthwhile return, tend to be very transparent. That doesn't chime all that well with football fans, who are primarily concerned with protecting their club's identities, playing well and winning things, and, strange as it may sound, aren't really used to owners who are motivated almost exclusively by returns. As a result, a number of American asset management and private equity firms have sought to put a friendly face to their takeover bids and ownership regimes. Whilst Middle Eastern regimes tend to just pay someone a load of money to do this for them in a manner that is never particularly convincing and typically only as ambassadors, American owners put a lot more commitment into their window dressing. LeBron James, for example, became part of Liverpool's ownership in 2011 when he acquired a 2% stake in the club alongside John W. Henry. That's not entirely insignificant, at least to most people, as was indicated by the NBA legend selling half his holding for a £35 million profit in 2023, but it was fairly insignificant in terms of Liverpool's overall ownership and the running of the club. Former NFL star JJ Watt and his wife, likewise, are one of several investors who own a combined total of 16% of Burnley, while the remaining 84% is owned by ALK Capital. Golfer Jordan Spieth and the world's most decorated Olympian, Michael Phelps, are both minority shareholders at Leeds United as part of the 49ers Enterprises ownership, and most interestingly of all, Tom Brady recently became a minority shareholder at Birmingham City. Brady is one of America's greatest ever athletes, having won the Super Bowl 7 times, and is very wealthy, estimated to have earned around $450 million throughout the course of his lengthy career. It is unclear, however, how much money he has actually invested and how much of Birmingham City he actually owns. Knighthead Capital Management, an investment firm with $9 billion in assets under management, who recently acquired the club, maintain that it isn't a publicity stunt, though they wouldn't reveal the extent of Brady's actual investment or ownership. Consequently, it's easy to be suspicious that Brady is yet another friendly face, although, admittedly, not that friendly given his recent crypto controversies, but certainly a very high-profile celebrity, essentially functioning as the public face of yet another faceless asset management firm. It should be noted that most Birmingham City fans are delighted that their club has new owners, understandably, and American owners, typically of the asset management variety, have been both very good, so far at least, for the likes of Ipswich, Aston Villa or Leyton Orient, and very bad as far as most Manchester United, Chelsea or Swansea City fans are currently concerned. But I'm dealing with the reality of them and their motives rather than the potential outcomes. In terms of the outcomes, however, I think that it would be reasonable to expect further Americanization to creep into the English game. Todd Bowley, for example, drew derision when he suggested that the Premier League should have an all-star game like most American sports. The idea of a 39th game in the Premier League played overseas, like the NFL does, and of course the mere suggestion of scrapping promotion and relegation in order to protect an owner's assets are all extremely unpopular in England. But that doesn't mean that we won't see reform, by stealth, or simply once public opinion relaxes. After all, we are all slowly but surely becoming more American. The UK is sometimes referred to as the 51st state, and is basically already a US colony when it comes to taking foreign policy orders directly from Washington. Soon, everything that you watch and consume will be American, your house will be owned by an American asset management company, as will the company that employs you, and the health service that you can no longer afford. They have already got us trick-or-treating, don't forget, and some people saying ASAP instead of ASAP. Perhaps it's only a matter of time, therefore, before we're all American, and further Americanization of English football won't be met with such scorn. About 30 asset management companies will own every football club in England, and almost all in Europe. Everyone will be part of some multi-club ownership conglomerate, and you'll be happy about it. This is the beautiful game in all of its glory, don't forget, being drawn up in the image of self-interested billionaires in Miami and New York. Wait, what? You don't want that? Well, fear not. There's always the option of a dictatorship in the Gulf who murder dissidents, and hey, who knows? This whole Russia-Ukraine thing is bound to blow over at some stage, sanctions may end, and then a few clubs will have the option of an oligarch who amass their fortune by robbing their own largely impoverished country's natural resources. I'll be honest with you, I had loads more planned for this video in terms of further exploring perceived growth opportunities in English football, alternative motives like Rob Couhig at Wycombe Wanderers, who cited the club's proximity to Heathrow Airport and his wife's fondness for visiting Europe when discussing his takeover of the club, what it all means for the future and whether, as Gary Neville has previously suggested, if not outright stated, American owners pose the biggest threat of all to English football, more so than even nation-states or ludicrously wealthy gangsters. But alas, it's already ridiculously long and I am a little unwell. All of that, plus a whole lot more, we'll have to wait for another time then. But thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and if you don't want to miss that and other videos in the future, make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for both this channel and my second channel, Alfie Potts Armour, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram or Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.